So in this tutorial, I'm going to walk through from start to finish creating a new competitive market analysis and give a little bit of insight along the way on what's right and what's wrong when you're thinking about this process. So to create our new report, I'm going to click here on this Create New button. Then I'm going to type in a customer name. In this case, it's going to be Tutorials CMA2. And we're going to use an actual address in Fort Collins, Colorado. The reason why I'm using an actual address and real data is I want to show you how it actually looks and show you how some of the features in the software actually pre-populate using this information. So all I have to do is click Save, and we're going to get ready to create our CMA. Now, this first page here, you'll notice, is on the right-hand side where we have all our controls and a report page that's being created live as we go. And on the left here, we have the steps that we're walking through. Now you can see there's a number of steps here, but really they're all broken up very small, so it's very easy to walk through this process, and as you get accustomed with it, it'll be very fast. So first we're going to do is create our property details page. Now to do this, we're just going to add in the information about this house. I add all the details here, and then if I wanted to, on this page you can see down below as I kind of scroll through it a little bit, we have a map and we have a picture of the house. Now this house's picture is pulled directly from Google Street View, so sometimes it's a little bit wonky or it's not, maybe a FedEx truck parked in front of it. And so to replace that, all you have to do is click this button here and you can upload your own photo to make this totally personal to your location. You can also zoom in and out of the map if you really want to have a little bit more maybe definition on this. I'm going to go to 16 or 17. So when I do this, all I have to do is click Save. You can see that I have this information added into this detail page, including my notes and my zoomed in map as well. But that is all here in this page that we're building. Then we're going to click Go to Next Step either here on this button or on the column. We usually recommend using the Go to Next Step on the bottom right because it just walks you through the steps correctly. Now the way the CMA and all the Focus First reports actually work is you go to your MLS, you do your search, you export your search and save that file to your computer. You are then able to upload that file from your computer to the software, create the graphs, and create these reports. But it's really important to get the right search. So this step here helps you really hone in and get that correct search. So whether you be in a non-standard neighborhood, a property with a unique feature, for example, backing into a certain lake or something like that, or in a standard neighborhood like this one, the search recommendations change on the bottom. So in this case, we're going to follow the standard search recommendations. I would go to my MLS now, search for single family homes, because that's that one property type I'm looking at, all status activity for the last 2 years by that subdivision name. Click Go to Next Step, and now we are ready to go ahead and upload that file. But before we upload the file, we want to make sure we tell the software which MLS we're actually using. So in this case, I'm using Iris, and since I selected that last, it stays, which is kind of nice. You don't have to do it every time. But if you're using a different one, all you have to do is go by your state and this drop down here, and then find it in the menu below, either through the search bar or by scrolling up and down. And then when you click on it, it will select it there as an option. Now you'll notice you can also star it and add it to your favorites, which then, if you show your favorites, it only shows the ones you've added there. That way you can find it pretty quickly. With that selected though, I can now upload. So I'm going to go to the next step, which is Upload Export File. I'm going to click this blue button. When I click this, it opens up a little dialog window that allows me to select my file. So clicking here for the 2 years of English Ranch data, click Open, and then in a couple seconds it uploads this file and it's good to go. Now you might see a warning here. That's not necessarily meaning it's not going to work, but it means that our system is identifying that the data set you uploaded is either missing something or maybe limited in some of the upload. And I'll give you a recommendation on how to fix that, but it doesn't mean it doesn't work. Sometimes your area just doesn't have as many sales or maybe not all the same status activity reported, but in most cases you should see green. If you ever see red and it's not uploading correctly, please reach out to us at support@focusfirst.com because that means something in your MLS changed and we need to update our settings. But just like that, click Next, and we're ready to start creating our report and adding some graphs. Now the first graph is actually created automatically just based on the city and the area you're in, and this is the FHFA graph. So this is pulling in from the Federal Housing and Finance Agency's data that really tracks resales to get a good appreciation number. And so we know we're in Colorado and we know we're in the Fort Collins area based on the information we put in that first report section. But if I wanted to change any of these, all I have to do is go to this little drop-down menu, select my state, select my area, and then it would load these up. Now you can choose to do both the state and the city like I show here, Or if you want to just do the city, I can untoggle the state one in this option up here, and now it's just showing me the city. So this is now the report page that we'd see for the wide area trend, which gives us a good idea of just what's been going on in that kind of broader, in this case, citywide district. Going to the next step, the other created for you graphs are the area patterns. So this first area pattern is called the odds of selling. It tells you really the desirability of the neighborhood. Anything over 60%, it means the odds are in your favor. So 95% for the last 12 months is kind of unreal. It just means that this area is hot, and anything that comes to the market is probably going to sell in this area because people want to live there. That's great for us when we're looking at that, and it helps us when we get to pricing to really understand if we're going to bump higher or bump lower based on what we're looking at. The next pre-made for you graph is the time to close graph, and this shows you your average days to close, and it really gives you an idea of how long you should expect before offers are coming in. Some cases you have a really long window. In this case, it's a very short window of 35 days. So meaning we should see an offer basically day one or weekend one at least. If we don't, we know we're probably overpriced based on what the market's telling us. So we can readjust pretty quickly on that one. Sometimes you'll see average time to close though, like 67 to 90 days. And that means, hey, if it's 90-day average time to close, just because we didn't get an offer that first weekend, it's not time to panic yet. That's kind of still following the pattern. On the next graph here, we have the buying pattern that really shows us when in the year homes tend to sell the most. We can say that when you're listing this house for sale, will you fall into this window as far as the close date goes? If you do, that's when the most buyers are out there looking. That's when the most activity is expected. So you're probably going to be able to price maybe a little bit more aggressively because you have more people's eyes on your home. Now we get to the real meat and potatoes though of pricing. The first graph we're going to look at is a pricing scattergram. So to look at a pricing scattergram, we're really thinking about the idea of what did houses sell for in the past and what does that tell us as far as worth goes. Now we look at a scattergram, we ask ourselves two questions to start out with, which is the line, the trend line here, which is created based on the relation between the dots that are representing the homes that sold, is that line up and to the right? And are the dots close to it? Is there good correlation of the data? So looking at this graph, I would say, first off, the line is up and to the right. But I don't know if those dots are very correlated, meaning they're not very close to the line. Now, first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to change the x-axis in the bottom and see if the next one works for us. If it works, we're good. If it doesn't, we'll try the third one. But in order to do this, all you do is click that button and you see it refreshes just like this. Now, pretty clearly you can see that a lot of these dots now are right close to the line, minus this one right down here. So we have to ask ourselves first when we see something like this is what's going on with this outlier? Now this one here on Harrington Court, which I can hover my mouse over and it'll kind of highlight that property. I can scroll down to the data sheet and read more about it, or I can click on it and it'll give me a little text box. Now if I want to read that a little easier, I can just kind of do this to increase the font size, and I can look at that information. Looking at it from here is one way. Another way would be through MLS. In this case, I know that this dot here is a patio home. So I know it's not necessarily the same pricing structure, even though it's still detached, as the rest of the houses in the neighborhood. So I have two options. I can either get rid of this dot, and I can do so by clicking either on the on-chart checkbox here or just anywhere in the blue area, or I can leave it on here and highlight and let people know it's a patio home while also not having it affect the trend line. Now to do that, I can click on the notes section. I can type in patio home and click save, and now you'll see that this note at the bottom shows patio home. Now again though, I don't want this pulling the trend line down, so all I have to do is go down to my data sheet, click on the trend line option here, and it'll remove that so that these dots are all pretty well correlated now just to that. However, again, if you want to just remove it, all you gotta do is click either on the checkbox or anywhere in the blue other than that trend line box, and it'll remove it from the graph, making it pretty easy to see that this is all correlated. So just like that, we have a scattergram that's working for us. Now the question we're going to ask ourselves though, and there's a lot more features in this that you'll play with, the ability, for example, to changing the data in these data points if something came in weird or something like that. But the main question we want to look at is what does this tell us about how we should view our subject property's value to start out with? Now to do that, we're going to add in our subject property. So to do that, we're going to click this add property button. In this case, if you select the status as subject, it auto fills in all the details that we put in earlier, which is kind of nice because you don't have to do that multiple times. And I'm going to click add to chart. Now you'll see this dotted line that pops up right all the way at the top here. And this is our subject properties representation. Now you notice there's no dot here because we didn't put in a price because we're actually looking to see what that price is. Now, looking at this trend line, we can see we basically intersect probably, I don't know, it's probably 780,000-ish, my general guess here. We can look at that more in depth though, if we needed to, by going and clicking edit on that option and then toggling on this intersection line, which gives us this vertical one. So 782 is what we're looking at. So looking at that then, we're saying, okay, this is probably what the value of the trend shows us. But some dots are a little below, some dots are a little above. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, where does our dot go in this range? Do we go a little above or a little below? Which of these are we most similar to? So if I'm gonna go ahead and take off that intersection line here just to make this a little cleaner. So what we want to do is we want to look at the closest dots to our house and open up those text boxes to ask ourselves a question of which of these are we closest to. So you can see here that this one over here on Stonehaven has got a 5-bed, 4-bath built in 1998. It's mostly finished basement. About 200 feet of that is probably a storage unit, and it's about 0.16 acres. So a little bit smaller lot. Now this one here is a 4-bed, 4-bath, but significantly larger at 3,800 square feet, 3,649 of which is finished, but only a 4-bed, 4-bath, and on that 0.2 acre lot. So the real question is, why would this one be maybe more along the trend line, even though it's smaller and thus less price, whereas this one's below the trend line? And the real question that really answer that is, you can see that that 5th bedroom is probably putting us up a little bit above the line. So very quickly I can say, hey, we're going to probably be on the upper end of this line, not the lower end or below it like this. This house here, that's a lot higher. If we looked at this and said, well, do we match this one? We're very similar to a lot of the builds as far as the features, the bedrooms and stuff like that. However, I did look at this one, and knowing this is a complete renovation. It's brand new across the board. That's why it's so far above the line, where the rest of these are the standard resales. They're in good condition, like ours is. So what that tells us is our base price is probably going to be around $785, is what we're thinking. Okay, so now I say base price, this is where people get a little bit confused on the process. Obviously, you could stop here and say $785, that's our price. So if I type this in, let's go on 785,000 on my subject property one. That's the price we're looking at. Good, ready to list, ready to sell. However, Focus First is really built on the idea of being competitive in the market. So what we need to do is look not just at this and what's sold, but we need to look at what's going on with the market conditions, whether it's shifting to a buyer market, a seller market, if there's a slowdown, or if there's opportunity. And we need to know basically what our competition is, so we position ourselves correctly so that buyers, when they see our house and other houses, they see the value in our price and they want to buy ours. Now, that doesn't mean that we're always the lowest price, but the right value. So what we're going to do to do that is we're going to take this idea and we're going to say, okay, a buyer that's buying a house at $785 would probably also be okay at buying a house at $800,000. It's probably not that much above for them. Thus being said, another person that's looking from $800 to $850, they might be willing to go down a little bit and then just invest a little bit to just make it their own on a $785. Now, someone from $750 moving up and looking there, they could also probably kind of stretch the limits a little bit and get to that point. However, the question starts popping up in your head though is, okay, so what if the market is shifting toward a buyer side and is slowing down? If there's very much a buyer's market and we need to kind of account for that, we might be a little bit below this line, bringing us almost down to that 750 if we had to. Obviously, this graph would not show that, but if the market demands us to be lower because of whatever is going on economically, then we might have to kind of position for buyers at 745 to also reach us. So what we want to do though is just cast a wide net to find our competition. So in this case, we're going to cast a net from up to 800,000, probably down to about 700 to get a full picture of what that entire range of pricing could be for us and to see what our competition is. Now we do that, let me skip past one little section here. This is just the pricing map that shows you what's on the graph. We do that by doing a new search. So the search for the competition is really kind of key. We're going to constrain this by a buyer's own idea, meaning what's the area a buyer would be willing to buy in that also fits our house in our area. Because obviously it's not just that neighborhood. They might be across the street or they might be a couple blocks over that has a similar year build and has the same school district and everything like that. And then we're going to constrain by that price, saying we're searching for all activity, all status activity in that buyer zone that we're going to draw on the map, or however you kind of define that. Usually using north, south, east, and west boundaries like this here. And And we're going to say we're going to do this, but we're going to constrain it by that price range we talked about. The idea in this case of being 700 to 800,000. So we do that search, and then we're ready to upload it to our software like we did before after exporting it from our MLS. We then load that in, get our green check mark good to go, and we're going to look here first at the data that came in. So the data that came in, I'm saying this just very roughly, is represented here by this search. If we had no properties that kind of fit in this range, it would basically shrink it or grow it as needed as far as this labeling goes based on the data you upload. But if you need to change this, you can kind of manipulate it however you need to. And we can type in, really explain, in this case, I'm going to say Southeast Fort Collins as a buyer zone here so that when we present this to a customer, they can see this and understand what a buyer zone is. But the real takeaway from this data that we want to look at first is what is going on in market conditions. So when it comes to market conditions, the first thing we're going to look at on this real estate pond, and we call it the real estate pond, by the way, because essentially the real estate market is a simple metaphor. Homes come in and they're flowing, and if they get a lot of sight on them and they are loved, they flow back out. They come in, they get an offer, they sell, they leave the market. And that's kind of the top layer of water in a pond. Basically all the light gets there, everything sees it, and if it's on that top layer, it kind of goes from the inlet to the outlet very quickly, and that's where most of the current is at the top. If it kind of sits for a little bit, new listings are kind of piling on top of it, it starts going down a little bit lower where it's not seen as much, obviously less light layer in a layer of water, and it's kind of sitting down here hoping to eventually get pulled out as well at the market. Now worst case scenario, if it sits for too long, it hits that dark zone that basically gets nothing that you see. We call it the stagnant mass, where it's kind of just sitting there, and eventually it kind of comes off and almost always is withdrawn or expired. This is kind of the understanding of the market, and what it tells us is first and foremost, this little dial right here, is this seller's or buyer's market? Is the flow increasing or decreasing when it comes to this feeling? And is it going to in the next 90 days? This actually projects the future for 3 months period. So in this case, we can see it's favoring sellers, meaning right now there's a lot of pent-up demand that's going to be helping us. And that's what this concept of supply and demand is right now it's favoring sellers. If we get in the market today, there's buyers out there that are waiting for our house to appear. We can see that by looking at this bottom number down here that shows us 35 new projected sales in the next 90 days, which really means there's a lot of opportunity to get our house sold. So now we're thinking, okay, we're not going to probably go below that number if we go back to that scattergram. We're probably not going down that much in this case because we have odds that are good, we have the dial in our favor, and we have a lot of opportunity. So if anything, we're actually look up to maybe going to the 800,000. Now, the question about that is, how do we know where to position that price and what we're competing against? And that's where the positioning scattergram comes from. So if you're on this pond again, we go to the next step, or click on the left here to positioning scattergram. And this positioning scattergram here is showing the homes that are for sale and those that are under contract in that kind of broader area that we did. Now, one thing I want to note is you can see how these are kind of cut off at the top. Sometimes the software does that because that's just where the bounds are set, because there's only 800,000 in there. But if we want to create a little spacing, all you have to do is click in these little boxes in the corners and then type in your new number. So I'm going to go ahead and increase this thing to 820,000, just to give us a little bit more room here, and then bring that kind of bounds just so we can see a little clearer. Okay, so we have 3 homes that are for sale, one at 800, one at 775, and one over here at 765. So our question is, how do we compete against them, these 3, but also get ourselves the best price where we're one of those people that are in that active and selling fast layer at the top of the water? Because remember, we're looking for a 35-day sale. We want to make sure we sell well. So let's look first at that base price thought at 785 and see how we compare. So I'm going to first add my subject property to this positioning scattergram by clicking Add Property, doing Subject again, and I'm going to go ahead and add that 785 into here. Awesome. So here's my dot right here. You can see it again coming down to the square footage at the bottom. But I'm going to add one more little feature to make this easy for us to really compare, and that's this quadrants option. So I'm going to click this button down here. You can see we have these quadrants that now show up with lines on both ways. Now the reason why I like the quadrants is if you think about everything else in the house being standard, a bigger house should sell for more. If the features are the same, the amenities are the same, a bigger house should sell for more money. So what that tells us is if a home was bigger in square footage, over to the right, and it was up here in this top right quadrant for sale, that would make sense. So that would be basically, hey, it costs more and it's worth more. It's the same value from a perception standpoint as something that's smaller and costs less. So that's kind of a tie when it comes to competitive situations. We look down here in the bottom left, it would basically be the same. We would be the bigger house in this case for more money versus this one here that's smaller and is cheaper. Now, if there's anything in the bottom right, that means it's bigger and lower price than ours. If everything else is standard, everything else is the same, then we are actually at a competitive disadvantage to that property, meaning if a buyer had to weigh their options between this one and that one, ours is of less value. If there's any homes in the top left, that means they're smaller and higher priced than ours, then that puts us in a competitive advantage, meaning you get more space for less money. So looking at this position, you can see we have two homes that kind of fall into this left quadrant here. Now this one's pretty close to being at the line, so 775. So basically for $10,000 more, you're going to be getting more than 500 square feet extra, just a little bit more. So that in general means we're probably at an advantage over this because of the fact that it's close to the same price and we're so much bigger, if everything else is the same. This one down here is less than our property, and it is significantly higher priced based on the value of that because it's only 2,200 square feet. So we should have an advantage over that one. However, if I do look at this one being on Warren Landing, I can tell you right now this is on a coveted area in Fort Collins called Warren Lake. It's not really a fair comparison in our neighborhood because it's not necessarily the true standard neighborhood as it all rims a lake. So that one's a little bit unique. That one would be, if a buyer wanted to buy that house versus our house, they're probably not the same shared buyer. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's not necessarily 100% pertinent to our competition, but it's just kind of the way that it lays out. So looking at this though, at 785, we probably have an advantage over this house. This house here is bigger and is less priced, so we might have a slight disadvantage to that one. This one we're probably pretty neutral to because it's so much on like a true 45-degree angle feeling that we're probably okay. And then this one we're not really too worried about because it is a special location, so that one's kind of like its own little thing. So that tells us we're in a competitive advantage situation here at 785. We would be okay with pricing here, or we're going to be probably one of the first houses to get sold. It's going to be a little bit of a bidding war scenario probably. But the question is we know all the data is going in our direction and we know that we have a lot of opportunity here. So could we maybe go up? Now let's look at that situation. And a cool thing about this quadrant, it means we don't have to necessarily go in and change the data. We can actually shift and then click and drag this up however we want to. So I'm gonna pull this up to 800,000. And now let's do that same thought again. So this house over here is significantly bigger than our house, and it's only 765 now, so that's probably a better value to our house. So it's a little bit of a negative layout for us. We're more neutral with these ones. And now this one that's over here is still in the same spot where it's kind of not as relevant, but at the same time is, again, we're still basically in the same spot we were there. We're not losing to that property because it's a special buyer. So in this case here, we are not number one in the line here, but we are in the top 50%, because this one's probably the most value. We're second in line, and then these guys were tied on. So the question on this becomes, we might not be in the most competitive advantage situation, but we're now in a great position where we can really kind of look at this and say, we're second line, we're in the top 50 as far as value goes. Maybe we're, at this point, we're true standard with this one, maybe it's still a little bit advantage in that one, but we're not in a bad spot here. Now, this is one of those cases where the question would be 785 or 800,000, which price is best? Now, before we jump to that really fast, and before we get that answer, there's one last check we're going to do before we get to thinking about how to do that. And that's this positioning map. So the last thing we're going to do before we make that decision is look and make sure all the properties we're looking at are relevant to our search. You can do this at the start too, but I just want to do this in this order so you can kind of see it as we walk the process. This is our house here, and you can see that a lot of the competition is in this southeast area of Fort Collins. However, there's two that are way down here. Now, these two that are way down here actually are a different school district and an area of town that's totally not relevant to these two. So we want to take these off the graph. Now, the cool thing on the map is I can do that actually by clicking on here, by referring to this dot being 9, and then this dot here being B. Once it's updated, is now A. I'm going to go ahead and remove that one. And now we have data that's all relevant. If I go back to the positioning scattergram, you can see that a couple of the yellow dots have disappeared, but everything else stayed the same. Okay, so none of the ones that really were our true comparison though were incorrect. So now we're thinking 785 to 800 is probably what we're thinking. So what we're going to do, more than anything, is put this information into here, save those changes, and now we have this idea here to present to the customers. So clients will see this and they understand it. Now, one last little kind of caveat on that though, is we do love to see bridge prices. Now, bridge prices are the big numbers that really people use when they're searching for data and searching for homes for sale. And these are the ones that you'll see mostly on Zillow or even like your drop-down menus in your MLS. And so if we can find one that really matches that bridge price, it's even better. So in this case, realistically, 800 probably hits that bridge price the best. And that's because it just is on every search value across the board. And that's a great number to be at in this case. We probably would recommend that. However, you can see we do let you put your list price in. A lot of times we don't like doing that because we want to have this conversation with the client, let them write on this dotted line what they view their price should be based in this range after you walk through this process with them. Now, the last part of this is really just answering the key customer questions of what expectation that they should expect. So basically, the sales experience is kind of a key function of understanding the area in general. So how long should it take for the house to sell? We can answer that pretty quickly. When's the best time to sell? During this time. Knowing that, is this in your timing? If you're not in your timing, would it be better maybe to wait like 2 months? Maybe do some improvements that we know after looking at that scattergram can move the value up or down. Or if you're ready to go, then we're going to do this and we're going to look at this. And if we don't have offers at 6 days, we're going to maybe take some action and reposition. Repositioning is coming back in, looking at the positioning scattergram and seeing if any of the competition that we're competing against changed. Did some of those go under contract or did a bunch of new entrants come in that's kind of stealing our thunder? Again, at 12 days and again at 18 days to make sure we're taking those steps correctly. Now, this is automatically created based on your area patterns. So these numbers will change based on this number here and really kind of give you a good guideline to go off of. So once you've done all this, you've now created your whole CMA report. It is here, laid out, ready to use, and ready to show. All the way from start to finish, from map to scattergram to pond to the positioning, all the way down to your positioning for the market and your sales experience if you have that turned on. Now, one thing that's kind of cool about the way the software works is it lets you change what pages are included and make edits on these pages. So first, if you click Edit Pages, it lets you change what pages are included. So in this case, if I click Reset, you'll see we have a table of contents that wasn't originally being shown there and expectations as your default. However, if you wanted to kind of take some things off, let's say that you wanted to not include the data sheets, you just wanted to have the map and the graphs, all you do is uncheck these options. And when you click View Report again, it will now re-render the report without those on there. If you want to change the order, maybe you wanted to show the data, in this case, after the graph, you can kind of pull this over and you can rearrange these pages pretty easily just to do that. Now, if you want to make some edits on some of these pages, in particular the cover page, all you have to do is come down to this Edit Cover page where you can change your information here at the bottom, either using different agent branding information, which is in your profile and billings area, which is in that other tutorial video, or you can upload a custom graphic pretty easily. All you have to do is make a graphic that matches everything you want in that corner, make it to this size that's recommended here, and once you have that and you've kind of created that in your own way, click this button here, which opens an open window where you can kind of put your own image in there. In this case, I'm going to leave it Agent Branding, click View Reports, and now as we see this thing load, we can kind of go through. I have my table of contents, and I now have, for example, because I changed the order of this, I have my graph and then the data sheet. So that's pretty simple as far as creating your CMA goes and laying it all out. I know this is a longer video and I know this is a little more intense as far as getting through, but as you get a hold of this and as you get a hang of it, you can do these lightning fast and super accurate. Now, when you're ready to go ahead and show this to a customer, if they happen to be in-house in your office with you, you can present that using the online present option here by clicking the present button, which just kind of walks through these pages just like this, going through it as you can talk through and really discuss it. Or you can download it using the download function and print using the print function. Now, if you're on Safari, your print function won't show at the top here like this one does. This is on Google Chrome. If you come down in the middle and kind of hover your mouse right over the middle of this area there, you'll have your options show up for downloading or opening in preview so that you can then print it however you wish.